Good morning. My name is John Porter III. I'm under Dr. Andrew Robb at Clemson University, and today I'll be presenting an analysis of longitudinal trends in consumer thoughts on presence and simulated sickness in VR games. It's a long thing. It's a long title, but don't worry. We'll get through it. So, the television, the radio, movies, the cell phone, and the console. What do all of these pictures have in common? One, they are the initial infant versions of themselves. Two, they have somehow globally entwined within our everyday lives. And three, they're all used for some sort of social or gaming interaction. So our question was, does VR fit these other criteria? We think so. So our research question is, in terms of research perceptions, as users have become more accustomed to consumer VR now that it's been released to the general public, what longitudinal trends are we seeing, and how are they changing over time? To answer this, we used Reddit, which I found out yesterday a lot of other people are using to find research, so I'm very excited. So for those of you who aren't sure what Reddit is, it's a very popular social discussion website, ranked very highly, both in the US and worldwide, has a large amount of users and active communities where people can have conversations about different topics that they're very interested in. The one we chose to select our research focus on is the R Vive. For those of you who aren't familiar with what a Vive is, it is a VR headset, one of the more popular ones that was released in April 2016, which is when we began our Reddit post search, all the way to 2 years after. We selected the Vive because of all the different affordances it had and how popular it was based on other VR headsets at the time. During our search, we chose 3 topics to look into: VR sickness, which is the virtual reality version of motion sickness, and immersion and presence. For the sake of time and also because of the themes that we found that were correlated, immersion and presence will be reduced into just one topic. So we chose VR sickness because it is pretty much what we found to be what makes VR not enjoyable for players as compared to other consoles that they can play, because obviously it makes people sick. And it usually happens because players can see movement, but since they aren't experiencing movement, they suffer some type of physiological sickness. Presence and immersion is the opposite. We found that it is what makes VR more enjoyable than maybe some other consoles because of all the different things you can do and how it makes you feel when you're in a VR headset compared to playing things on a screen. So all the data collection, we had a large amount of Reddit posts that we read through to get through all these topics and through that 2 years. So we were only able to sample them for every 3 months that we could try to collect an accurate amount of longitudinal data. In that 3 month interval, we read about an average of 30 posts per topic, so that's 3 topics, equivalent to about 800 posts, a little over 800 posts, all with comments ranging in each post anywhere between 1 to 300. So it's a lot of comments, a lot of posts. And as we read posts, they were constantly compared and coded to, using thematic content analysis to strengthen our major themes and sub-themes. All right, so without further ado, let's get into the data we found. For the sake of time, because I have 2 years worth of data, I just split it into early post and later post. The early post is about the things that we found within the first year or so, and then the later post is about the things we found in the second year. So in regards to presence, one of the major things we found in the early post is hardware affordances can lay the foundation for presence, both positively and negatively. So with vertical FOV, motion controls, these are things that the Vive itself has over other headsets that made presence more, increased presence more for players over time. Whereas having missing frame rates, flickering, or dead pixels, and just the general dislike of the lens at the time reduce the presence. So depending on what type of hardware you're using can greatly affect the user's presence. Even though the negative things, most users did agree that it was self-made error from improper setup. The other thing we found was that looks aren't everything. but failed expectations are. So if a user sees your game, they don't really care as much if it's realistic or very fancy and graphically sound, but more concerned of if things work the way they intend to work. So if everything looks nice, but things are not working like they think it should in that world, then that's when players lose presence dramatically. So, for example, Minecraft doesn't look realistic, but players enjoy it because it actually works the way they feel it should. In the later post, this is extended, where users felt not just that things in the world should work as they should, but also the interactions themselves. So if a player tries to pick up something or something drops to the floor and it ends up going through the floor, that'll dramatically pull them out of their feeling of presence in the game, because the things that they're trying to interact with are also not working as they should. And this also extends to having important signifiers, because if players have to guess and figure out things that they can and can't interact with, it will also greatly reduce their presence. I know I'm talking more negatively about things that will reduce presence, but if you follow these things, then it'll actually increase it more so, or at least keep it level if they're already feeling present. So let's go back in time to early post again from the view of motion sickness. We found that users often wondered why were they experiencing motion sickness? How did they stop motion sickness? Where is it coming from? And the users' discussion that we found came to three things in the end. One, they blamed the developers, because some of the developers were moving the player's point of view around without the player's consent, which made them considerably sick. Two, self-made error. They realized that some of them just weren't following the instructions that came with the Vive when they opened it. So they weren't actually setting it up properly, which sometimes caused motion sickness. And three, most agreed that it's just something, a part of life. People just get in VR, they get motion sick because maybe you need to practice more, and then eventually you won't have motion sickness anymore. And the other major thing in motion sickness in the early post was the large amount of debate over what type of locomotion techniques should be allowed. In the beginning, it was always teleportation, where users were actually very comfortable with teleportation because it made less people sick. But as we saw over time, people started to get more upset with that because they felt they were limited. So there was a large amount of debate that rose over time. In the later post, we found that users actually became more mature in their understanding of motion sickness, and eventually understood that it's just better to give more options to the users. So if they have more options of different locomotion techniques they can use, it makes everyone happy, because some people enjoy teleportation while some enjoy other forms of locomotion movements and the such, where some people can get sick and some people don't, and it's just as simple as that. And finally, in the later posts, we actually noticed that users were becoming an active part of the solution to motion sickness, where they were helping to advise other users in the post discussions about how they got motion sickness and how they were able to overcome it and the like. Also offering suggestions to developers on how to help improve the current locomotion techniques so that it can expand to a broader audience. So my takeaway points for things that the developers should try to consider when making VR games would be, one, that although novice users can and will adapt to the new hardware and software, they will be excited about the nuances of VR, but eventually that'll wear off, where they are like children. You start in VR, everything seems really flashy and interesting, but as you get accustomed to it, the flash wears off, and now they want to get more to the nitty-gritty of interactions and more important topics. So just be aware. One of the most important things I can say is that clear signifiers and expected outcomes can greatly impact presence and acceptance of your game. If players can't easily find out or figure out what they can and can't interact with, and things aren't working as what they expected should, it'll immediately impact their presence, and they may just get rid of your game and start negatively talking about it to other people. It's best to try to offer as many multiple locomotive options as you possibly can. I know that's a hard thing to try to integrate in a game. Just integrating one is probably enough, but if you can, try to integrate two, just because some people might not like that one, and if you can add more variety in your game, then it's the better. And my last is keeping up with these social channels is going to be very beneficial to designers, we think, because in the Reddit post and maybe some other social areas, it's a good place for developers to find short and long-term design goals, and also to let the users get an insight into where they're currently thinking they're heading with their game. And then the users themselves can let you know things that they feel will be good or bad in the early stages of iteration. That way you can get it fixed before you actually send the game out, and get more immediate feedback. And that is it. So I'd like to give a special thanks to my advisor, Dr. Andrew Robb, Clemson University, NSF grant for funding my research, and the Clemson Human Factors Institute for providing my travel. Thank you.
Hello. Hi.
Hello.
This is Narcís Parés from Universitat Pompeu Fabra, so the hosting university. Thank you for your talk. It's interesting, but I was wondering a couple of things. On the one hand, I think it would be useful always that when you post this sort of studies, you make sure that you define head-mounted display-based VR, because virtual reality can have many system configurations, so it can be misleading as to how broad the study is being dealt with. So head-mounted display doesn't actually mean VR, or VR doesn't mean head-mounted display. So just that's like an extra comment. But I was also wondering, have you contrasted all this with other like scientific journals and papers that have been posted on presence and motion sickness? Because Reddit tends to have a lot of people that speak out of the top of their heads. And there's journals such as Presence Teleoperators and Virtual Environments, which have discussed all these topics like broadly since the 90s. And there's a huge amount of literature on that. So for example, with regards to motion sickness, it's quite clear nowadays that it's because of misalignment between different sensory inputs. So for example, having only visual input of motion and not correlating with physical proprioception and kinesthetic perception of the motion. So those things are something that we already know, and that I thought it would be interesting to bring up in your study. No? On the other hand, with respect to presence, I was also a bit surprised that in a context of a Chi play in which we are currently, in which we try to very often make fantastic worlds that are not simulation, that all your analysis of presence is very based on simulation. So if something falls off your hand virtually and it falls through the floor, it seizes your sense of presence. Well, but if that's the way I want to build my fantastic world, because strange things happen, because strange things are fun when we design play activities, playful activities, well, where does presence come in that moment? Is it important to have presence? Is it not? But moreover, there are many studies which say that presence should not be linked to simulation. So I would like to know your position about all this. Yeah.
Okay, a lot to unpack. Give me a second. I want to make sure I answer all your questions. The first is, you are completely correct. Head-mounted display is not the equivalent of VR. I apologize. I just wanted to make sure that, well, regardless. But the second was presence and motion sickness in the literature as compared to what I found here. The purpose of this paper was to get an idea of how the user and the consumer base is looking at presence and simulator sickness through their lens, so that we can have an understanding of, because you're correct, I have read the literature on presence and simulator sickness, and I know that the different nuances of where we're at currently as researchers, but with this, it's more to find out what the average Joe, the consumer, believes or sees presence and simulator sickness, and getting an understanding of their aspect, because ultimately we're building these games, we're building it for them. So to get an understanding of where their mindset is as they go into VR, we thought would be very beneficial. Also, There's actually a large amount of researchers and developers and people that do understand the differences between presence and immersion and simulator sickness versus VR sickness in these Reddit posts. So all these Reddit posts aren't just from people that have no idea. There's also a large amount of people that are very experienced in these topics that are having these discussions. And your last question.
Well, no, you've answered it.
Oh.
But actually, what I'm trying to put through is that maybe by addressing these issues in this manner, we're just reinforcing those misconceptions, not only in the people out in the street, the lay people, but also scientists that haven't read all that literature
Yes.
that we have read, right? So I think it would be important to change those perspectives,
Yes.
because they're completely wrong, actually.
Yes,
Thank you.
no problem.
Thanks again. I think that's.
I'll be around if you have more questions.